Hi, everybody. It is April 12th, 2026, about 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I am Cosmic Mathul, Winter Solace. This is the Winter Solace podcast for the month of May. I gotta get a new office chair. I don't have any money. WinterSolaceProductions.com, merch at MySpreadShop.com, YouTube at Kyoto Roller Derby, Instagram Cosmic Mathul, XWS_CWOT. Telegram, Winter Solace Prada, the 80th Chamber of Shell and Chat. We're also active on Facebook and eBay, and then, of course, CosmicMathul.substack.com. Donations via Cash App at hashtag WSCWOT. Alright, so, obviously, bombing the fuck out of Iran, part 2. Now, the last podcast ended basically at the onset of the 38-day war or whatever we had with Iran, where we basically just went in there and completely bombed them back into not being functional. And then I took a break from podcasting, mostly to work on and prepare a very lengthy Substack on underground black metal and vinyl record production, which we have the third part up as well today. Or I do. Anyway, bombing the fuck out of Iran, part 2. Ceasefire talks have failed over the nuclear weapons issue, refusal to include Lebanon and everything in the Strait of Hormuz. Woke up this morning, watched a 4-minute clip of J.D. Vance on my TV with breakfast, because I paid for the YouTube Premium app where you can just put everything on your TV, and that's how you don't get ads. So you can just get the playlists or whatever, and then I can just do like vaporwave, like all through my house. Or all through my apartment while I'm doing stuff. Anyway, basically 4 minutes, they were in Pakistan for 20 hours, and it failed. And now we're back to straight up tombstone like 4 or 5 hours later, with Trump threatening to bomb them back into the Stone Age. We're going to just do a naval blockade, and it's just... It's back to basically being just on, and we're going to burn the motherfucker down. Now, the only thing that's going to actually get us anywhere to proper regime change, and the reason I say proper regime change is, while I, like most people, really don't see why exactly we needed to go do this war now, when we couldn't wait till after the midterms, like a year. Yeah. The only thing that's going to get to what the proper objective is going to be is ground troops and regime change. And the only way you're going to get to regime change is with ground troops. We all know Trump was set up by Israel, the neocons, and the CIA with about a month or so to clean up their mess with this to hopefully salvage the midterms, or basically going to be conquered by the Democrats. Because that's how they are basically going to torpedo this, is they got him going in Venezuela. They gave him a win there, and he got all excited, and then they went right into Iran with a difficult, which is a different animal entirely, and then when that's done, Cuba is next, and my personal suspicion with little political insight is that following that, as they're asking for $1.5 trillion for a war economy next year, that Colombia, because he doesn't like the president there, and then Nigeria is next, even though Nigeria, I think the government is asking for help with one province. Okay, now it's Islam. This is the what is happening now is the only thing that unfortunately works with these people. About the only thing anyone on the negotiations could agree upon is that they didn't even know what they were negotiating about. The ceasefire was not going to work. And basically both the U.S. and Iran were just trying to stall for time to get more weapons there. Trump is bringing in more boats and shit with more weapons in them. And Iran is trying to reposition, rebuild, move missile launchers underground, and basically dig in. MAGA has basically at this point gone full Al-Qaeda, including fighting itself. Israel is just going to resume killing everybody. The Department of War is just going to burn a motherfucker down. And the Navy is basically going to hunt down oil tankers that paid tolls in the Strait of Hormuz like pirates. And yes, I'm aware that that title is screwed up. Now, I'm an American. I've lived in America my whole life. I was born in 1990. And my assumption has been, like everybody else, that the American military is the greatest on earth and that we are the authority figure of the world. And here's what happens every time we get into one of these wars. It was the same with Vietnam. It was the same with Iraq. It's the same with just about everywhere. Whoever we're at war with or who are invading, go, fuck you. It was the same with Afghanistan. That was the other one I was thinking of. Basically, just go, fuck you. We're digging in. We're going to do this, and we're just going to wait it out. Like Afghanistan, that's what they always do. But that's what they did. And that's what's happening with Iran. I will admit that it is moving a lot faster because clearly nobody wants a lengthy and protracted conflict. However, whether anyone likes it or not, this war is necessary, and the only people that seem to be helping us out in this are Israel, and all of the paid media and all the influencers and everything else are just going to go right back to the ZOG conspiracy theory, which I will be honest, seeing everybody parrot all of that out has pretty much just killed it for me. While I'm not an outright Zionist, obviously not, and don't necessarily align with the notion of greater Israel and territorial expansion, this is the Middle East. This is what happens there. And Israel is far more intellectually civilized than all of these other Islamic places, and it's the lesser of two evils. Okay? Now, everybody remembers Operation Iraqi Freedom. Okay? And everybody hated that. And I was 13 when this happened, when we went in there. Okay? Now, there's a lot of stuff about that nobody remembers. And it started similarly. The invasion began on March 19th, 2003, based off false intelligence. That is a very rough estimate of what happened here with Iran. Okay. Israel was going to attack them. And then they were going to attack back because their logic, which I don't understand how this makes any sense, is to just lash out at everybody in the region that doesn't expel the Israeli ambassadors and the American ambassadors, because they firmly believe falsely that this entire narrative is completely constructed by Israel and that the world is secretly ran by the Jews who are not Jews, and then these things just turn into... Similar when you go down those rabbit holes of people arguing online that turn into who moved what group of Jews that aren't actually Jews. And at some point, it's like, okay, that's not productive. But they are the ones who want to be knee-deep and entrenched in that in their society, and that's who you're dealing with. Now, the Iraqi government, with the Ba'athist government, we did the invasion in March 19th of 2003. They were basically disposed of in non-functioning in summer of 2003. And Saddam was captured on December 13th of 2003. That whole objective took less than a year. While we were at the same time engaged in a full-blown war with Afghanistan, who were far more culturally adept at basically just entrenching themselves and receding into the caves. Now we do not have a secondary major conflict, so it is moving much faster. Now, what everybody was pissed off about during the Iraq War was not the less than the year skirmish that removed Saddam Hussein in power unless you were a hardline Ba'athist. It's that everybody was pissed off at the decades of nation building after all this happened and the Abu Ghraib torture dungeons. I even used the subject matter for the Abu Ghraib torture dungeons for one of my electronic albums. Okay. Now, and there's a problem when you removed Saddam. And during his Iraq regime, if you stole a purse, you lost a hand. If you rose up against the government and did radical Islamic stuff, they would just kill you and leave your body in the streets. That is the type of mentality that has to be used in the Middle East, which scares a lot of people in the westernized world. Because we don't have these problems at the same degree in the US or Europe. Mexico, there are parts of that that are completely uncivilized, and people are a little more accustomed to that. And you notice they're not bitching on the world stage like some of these other people are. I mean, I like it, but they're not, bitching on the world like some of these, at the same level as, say, Spain or some of these other places that have just kind of gotten too comfortable with modern society. Now, what happened, and I forgot to put this in there, is once you removed Saddam from power... No, I did get to that later. Okay, currently the age of consent in Iraq is 9, because once Saddam was removed from power, it immediately devolved into a third world shithole with various radical Islamist groups vying for power in the autonomous Kurds region. And that's why Trump was saying, there are other issues if the Kurds go into Iran. Present day, there are currently still under 2,000 soldiers in Iraq, with Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani advocating for an indefinite presence of U.S. troops in the country. Because basically they know that the minute those guys are gone, some radical Islamist douchebag is going to run right over them. That's what you get into. And that is not our problem. And this is where America First comes in. Okay, now, one objective that was floated around in the news was balkanizing Iran once all this is over and splitting into several other countries. But the notion is, and this is what people need to understand, the American objective is just to end the Iranian nuclear program. And because all other options have failed, we're defaulting to the only thing that works, which is force and mass casualties. So, we have that. But once that is done, we are to leave, and they are on their own. So everybody dooming that this is going to last forever needs to just look and realize that we got our main objective at the time done in Iraq in less than a year while fighting another war at the same time. And everybody was just pissed off at what happened after that, which I highly doubt is going to be repeated. Now, Iran has been responsible for a global axis of resistance, and that's where what I wanted to do this video on to kind of so people can kind of understand that this may not be the blanket bad thing that it is, and that Israel is just being some puppet master. And I don't want to be seen as a defender of that, but in this instance, there's a little more to this. And as this all plays out, I guarantee you a lot of this will unfold, and people will kind of realize that this may not be the worst thing ever. Okay, now let's look at the Iran's proxies or axis of resistance, and that would be Hamas in Gaza. Now, the Gaza conflict began in 1948, before the Islamic Revolution in Iran, spanning 15 wars over Zionism. Most Gazans, Palestinians, are refugees being ethnically cleansed there in what is called the Nakba. Hamas is the Palestinian nationalist / terrorist entity that has governed Gaza since 2007 after fighting the Fatah group led by Mahmoud Abbas from the state of Palestine, which is the West Bank. And Hamas has received funding from Iran. And they act as a proxy close to Israel doing terrorism and jihad. And they were given until last Friday to disarm by Trump's UN knockoff, the Board of Peace, but likely won't and presumably will join the war with Iran, to join the current war with Iran. See, when they were going to do the ceasefire, the main thing that got Iran going to the negotiating table was China basically saying, you know, you can keep fighting, and when America knocks your infrastructure out, we're not going to pay to rebuild all your power plants and stuff, because that's what'll end up happening. That when we inevitably bomb all of that, that is inevitably who will have to rebuild that, either by supplying labor or more likely the actual components and shit to pay to redo all that. And Israel was set to resume fighting Hamas during what would have been this 2-week ceasefire period. So they would have no doubt objected to that. So that's why that was built to fail. And them insisting on Lebanon being involved, while dumb and a pretty big sticking point, is going to basically put this to, when it gets to a solution, it will probably get to a solution that puts an end to all of these groups. Okay, the other arm of the second arm of the axis of resistance is the Houthis in the country of Yemen, which is directly south of Saudi Arabia. Now, while this map is not necessarily accurate as it's more modern, Yemen used to be deunified. There was South Yemen, which is the area in the red, or the pink, and then North Yemen, which is the area in the green, and then obviously, you know, there's some of these other areas, but this is just a more modern map of the current conflict there. Yemen used to be North Yemen and South Yemen, and has been in a civil war since 2014 over something stupid with Islam. Okay, that is Yemen. The Houthis, which are basically the green, are funded by Iran as part of their proxy war with Saudi Arabia. Now, because Saudi Arabia hasn't entered into this current conflict yet, even though they have said if their infrastructure is continuously attacked, they will send troops in there, which may be one path to get to the inevitable ground troops that it's going to take to clear this. Iran and Saudi Arabia have basically been in an Islamic version of the Cold War with each other over who has power dominance in the Middle East. And that's where this is. And Israel recognized Somaliland and Somalia to move all the Gazan refugees there and build a military presence in that particular area to have direct conflict with the Houthis. And the Houthis are an Islamist political faction named after their founder, who was some cleric that was killed. Now, Yemen is currently one of the most fragile and least developed countries in the world. And it's, of all of the Middle Eastern countries, it is the worst. It is a humanitarian disaster. Somalia and South Sudan are still worse than this. But it's basically a failed state. And somehow this country will be completely destroyed by climate change. Now, I don't necessarily believe the climate change narrative of the carbon taxes and all of that in the manner that's being described and used to just basically implement global totalitarianism. But as some byproduct of all of that, or whatever they say is taking place, the country of Yemen would basically be completely destroyed. Now, Yemen will most likely block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is near basically the blue on the map, and it's another choke point for oil transport, as they've been striking Israel as part of the war with Iran. And this is where you kind of get into the need for regime change and global intervention. Okay, because the Strait of Hormuz and then subsequently this Bab el-Mandeb Strait are choke points to transport energy and oil supply from Saudi Arabia and Iran to the rest of the world. Because this is something that was never fixed. And you have these very vital global energy choke points administered in extremely volatile worldwide regions, which is not productive. Like, in theory, the Strait of Hormuz, whatever is on the other side of that, should be administered as an exclave of Oman, which is a fairly neutral country similar to Switzerland. And in the global order of things, there do need to be countries like that in order for society to function as it normally should. And people go, well, you always act like you're on the other side of all this stuff. It's like, no, I'm just looking at all this information and analyzing it with a rational thinking brain. Okay, now the third axis of resistance is the one that Iran basically said, this is our hill we're going to die on because we hate Israel and the negotiations don't even exist and aren't happening. And that gets into a lexus of what you're dealing with, and that's why you see a lot of these. I stopped paying attention to a lot of the alt-right podcast media because they're basically going and defending Iran, which is not, it is not a vehicle worth defending, but Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah is a Shia Islamist party in Lebanon, political party with an active paramilitary wing that was deemed illegal by Lebanon in March of 2026. Think of this similar to the Golden Dawn or like the Libertarian Party or something like that, where it's basically, it primarily functions as a political party. But in addition to that, they also have an active military wing. It started in 1982 with funding, support, and training by the IRGC of Iran, has fought Israel ever since to mirror they wanted to mirror the Iranian Revolution in Lebanon, only with a slight Lebanese nationalist perspective. It owns schools, TV stations, social services networks, and other things. It is also despised by 55% of the Lebanese population, because most of that country's problems are because they cannot get Hezbollah under control. Now, fuck Lebanon, because they're lucky to even have a country. They became independent from France in 1943, and everything was fine until the 70s, when they had a 15-year civil war and have never been able to recover. They were primarily occupied by Syria from 1976 to 2005 for 28 years. They were occupied by Israel, a different part of Lebanon, at the same time from 1985 to 2000, and they have since that time been consistently fighting with Israel, including multiple other ground occupations. Now, I'm not a Zionist. I do not necessarily believe in Israel's territorial expansion. And I think that they probably should not have settled there. But that was put into place by the Balfour Declaration, and they rejected the Madagascar plot to perpetually keep the world at war for religious destabilization. However, Lebanon is not a proper vehicle to resist that, because that country has no balls. Their only contribution to the global political cycle is basically being Israel's sex slave, tied up in a basement somewhere to be beaten and molested. Like, whenever Israel has a bad day, they just go and do a ground invasion of Lebanon. That's what's happening here. And while Iran was right that Israel basically is a problem with this and they need to stop doing this, the Lebanese government needs to just fucking take their damn country back. That's what needs to happen here. You have over half the population that hate Hezbollah. Take it back. And to further exacerbate how stupid Lebanon is, we're going to talk about Operation Grim Beeper. Okay, and this is graffiti, and the guy in the graffiti was the former head of Hezbollah. On the 17th and 18th of September in 2024, thousands of handheld pagers and hundreds of walkie-talkies intended for use by Hezbollah exploded simultaneously in two separate events across Lebanon and Syria. Now, for people who are curious, beepers and pagers are still actually used in modern society, mostly by doctors in the medical profession as that is not necessarily a profession, as you can't necessarily have your phone with you, your smartphone with you on your person while working in an ER, and a beeper is used to do that, so you're not constantly staring at your phone all the time. I mean, if you're in the ER for something, you don't want somebody in a trauma ward playing Candy Crush. So that's where beepers are still used. So they are still used in this. Now, 7 months prior, Hassan Nasrallah, the guy in the picture who was assassinated by Israel, instructed Hezbollah to switch to pagers, walkie-talkies, because Israel had compromised their cell phone network. Can you imagine being one of these people? Oh, our cell phone network has been compromised by the Israel. Well, we'll switch to pagers and walkie-talkies. That's normal over there. 2 months later, after doing this, Hezbollah bought presumably a pallet or pallets or some shipment of gold Apollo AR-924 pagers from a shell company that was actually Mossad. The beepers had explosives built into them as part of a planned 10-year espionage op. Hezbollah responded with a rocket attack, which Israel in turn responded by invading Lebanon again and then assassinating Nasrallah, followed by a ceasefire lasting less than 2 years. Basically, every time somebody in Lebanon does something, Israel just invades and no one cares. Grim Beeper was declared a war crime by the UN or something, but nobody did anything about it. And I guarantee you, when they were planning this, Trump and Bibi and all those people, they were like, all right, so we're going to go and bomb the fuck out of Iran. All right, and then Hezbollah's going to retaliate, and Israel's just going to do a ground invasion, and then we're just going to continue to bomb the fuck out of Iran. And that was probably the only time it was discussed. Iran basically just wanted to attach this to attempt to reign in Israel because they still do not understand their position in all of this. And while, yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, going on Israeli TV, doing a press conference and basically being like, yeah, if you were the life insurance salesman, Mojtaba Kalamini and Ali Laranjani, I would not, it would not be wise to sell the life insurance policy to these men. It would not be wise to do this, for they will not be alive much longer. Now, ahead of state going out and doing that, that's not really productive, but Israel has basically been fighting a proxy war with Iran on multiple different fronts for years, and that's how you get this and get to this point, because life is just grand in the Middle East. This is all normal there. Iran also did stuff in Syria, but that was effectively neutralized. That's not an issue anymore after Syria fell. And while now, and this war is extremely unpopular, Iran is basically the head of the snake. And I suspect that people's opinions on this will turn as time goes on. Especially as the Iranian stupidity further submits, now that the box is open. And if you read all these Telegram intel feeds and stuff, they're like, oh, well, we can survive for 10 years here. We're just going to entrench in. This will never end. Okay, this has been boiling up for a long time. This is just like a rancid boil that needs to be removed, or a dirty job at somebody's job that somebody has to do this. And I will reiterate that the only thing that's going to get us to the type of regime change that is likely required to end this in Iran is with ground troops, either the U.S.'s ground troops or some other Middle Eastern country or rebel groups, the Kurds or somebody. And at the end of this, NATO has basically rolled over and shit itself. Okay? Now, as I said in the first video about Iran, all these people, Trump, Bibi, the Iranians, Zelensky, all these people, they wanted to do this war, and all these other globalist countries and all the other countries affected by this basically aren't going to do anything other than bitch about the rising price of gas. Okay. As the energy crisis rolls on and people start to, kind of deal with some of the longer term effects of this, and Trump puts pressure on NATO and stuff, I do see some of these other countries coming in a peaceful capacity. Germany has already tried to negotiate with Iran. China and Pakistan have obviously tried to put pressure on them. But they're not going to come in until defensive capacity. I don't see any of these countries simply sending in troops or joining military operations unless somebody gets attacked somehow. And I would not put it past the Iranians to escalate this further rather than realize that they're basically just hung on to a religious conflict and their notion of their nuclear program, which there are plenty of countries that don't have that, and there is no need for them to have that because they won't work with people. However, NATO has revealed itself to be completely useless and also retarded, as Iran has basically been a global problem for years. Trump is basically cleaning up the deep state's mess. The idea behind globalism, or how it's sold to people, is to basically protect global commodities everyone needs, like oil, because the oil companies are never going to allow for an alternative to be built. Whatever happened to the car that built on water? I mean, we more likely to get the Iron Fist of Azerbaijan. Remember, I don't know what the hell that was, but they were talking like, oh, they will bow before the Iron Fist of Azerbaijan, and then they never entered the war. Because now Iran and then subsequently Yemen are going to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz and these other straits every time Israel does something they don't like, and that's probably spelled wrong. Because I think it's Israel. Yeah, that's a typo. The previous Shah was overthrown when he tried to nationalize oil during the Carter administration, and this is basically the same thing. Again, it's Islam, Africa, Middle East, certain parts of Asia, South America. The only thing they understand is a firm hand. Just watch The Last King of Scotland. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of the podcast. This is www.wintersauceproductions.com. Please go to our web shop and support our new releases. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.